So there was a lot of buildup in August and July and June of 2021. You had Georgia and Clemson facing one another in what was supposed to be, in theory, a playoff preview. That turned out not to be the case. And since that night in Charlotte, a 7-3 or a 10-3 Georgia win over Clemson, the two programs have quite obviously gone in different directions. Clemson has not played in the college football playoff since. Georgia's won two national championships, including that season. And, that night it was pretty palatable that, it was a big game. And I remember saying before the game, first of all, if you remember correctly, Clemson was favored in that game, which it didn't make a ton of sense to me that they were favored by 3 or 4, whatever it turned out to be. And then secondly, I remember going into the game that a lot of, sympathetic outlets on both sides to the programs that they covered were suggesting that the loser, could very well see the other in the playoff. I remember being on the field after the game and hearing, the Georgia players say to the Clemson players, "Hey, we'll see you in the playoff." And I remember very clearly saying before that, the loser of this game is probably not going to the playoff, if we're being honest. And as it turns out, that part was true. Clemson actually went on to have a decent season. It wasn't a great season, but it was a decent season. Lost to Pitt along the way. And now we're in 4 years later, almost three seasons, 4 years later, however you want to do the math. And the two are playing one another again, except this time the game will be in Atlanta. It will probably be a significantly healthier Georgia crowd. But the two programs have changed. As I said, Georgia with two national championships, Clemson on its, uh, moving forward in a very different time. At that point, the head coach at Oklahoma was their defensive coordinator. At that point, the starting quarterback at Florida State was their starting quarterback. I mean, it's been nuts. And on SiriusXM's College Sports Sunday this past weekend, Dabo Swinney was a guest, and he was asked about a lot of different subjects. And of course, he likes to giggle or laugh at people or notions. And here are some of the quotes from Dabo about that he was asked about. He says, "We're always adapting, changing, and evolving. That's just part of life." He went on to say, "What makes Clemson?" Well, first of all, in terms of the adapting, y'all are not adapting. You are not adapting at all. So how can I say that? Well, my wife is a huge Clemson fan. So the in-laws, they're definitely into it. They are supporters financially. I totally understand where the situation is for Clemson in terms of the ACC. They're very frustrated with that, the money there. But the notion that, Dabo he can say whatever he wants, but he's saying we are always adapting, changing, and evolving. That's a part of life. He is not adapting to the transfer portal. It exists, but he is not adapting to that in any way. Not that long ago, a major outlet put out that Clemson lost however many people to the portal. They have not gained one. So he's just not playing in the same universe of college football as everybody else. Now, where he starts to laugh is he always has this notion that they know what they're doing. Well, you know what you're doing. You got Deshaun and Trevor as your quarterback. I mean, it didn't look so good for a while, frankly, without those guys. Two of the last 3 years, they've not won the ACC championship. He talks about that a lot. He says for 12 straight, Clemson can point out that for 12 straight seasons, the teams are won 10 games every year. I think Georgia's won 10 games, something like 20 of their last 24 seasons or something like that. So like 10 wins in the ACC doesn't really do much for me, but that whatever. But he's done a great job there. And here's what he says when asked about Clemson being different from all the other places, which frankly it is. Now, it's very similar to Auburn, but it's in terms of the way that they are and all this stuff. It's a bit of a cult. And he says it's the same purpose we started with the program all the way back to day one when we got it going. We have stayed the course when it comes to what we're about and what we believe in. He says, I want the players to have a fun time. I want them to have a great experience. I also want them to win a championship. That's not changed. that's driven the program from day one, and if that's your purpose, then the results should support that purpose. That sounds great. However, you're not winning championships the way you're doing it right now. And you can giggle, laugh at me all you want, bro. I've been going to Clemson games since they were playing, 1-10, 1-11 Carolina or whatever it was that year in '98. I mean, I've been around the block for a while on that program too, and what he had for probably 4 years, maybe more like five. So certainly 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, that time uh, was exceptional quarterback play. Maybe not. Well, let me change that. 15, 16, 18, 19, 20. So 5 or 6 years ain't bad to have two starting quarterbacks, NFL starting quarterbacks as your guy. He had I would say as good a team well, he had the best team Clemson's ever had in 2018. Period. It wasn't even close. Now, how did he get that? Well, he had a great young quarterback in Trevor. He had NFL starters on the defensive line, which really mattered a ton because you couldn't run. You couldn't really do much offensively against them. That was the real problem. And so they just score like crazy, which they always had done. But anyway, getting back to the point here, he had great players. He does not have great players now. And the question is why? Well, somewhere along the way, they, as program vision or something, they chose to recruit guys that when they committed, they wouldn't go on any other visits. They tried to play by different rules. That is great when you're winning. And they're winning. They're just not winning like they used to from the point that LSU absolutely destroyed them in New Orleans. From that point on, they have been a above average for sure, but not an elite program. They have been a top 10, top 15 program. It depends on the year. I mean that every year that they've played from that moment on, from New Orleans on, there's been some sort of disappointment. And that happens a lot, by the way, in college football. So it's still been successful. It's just not been to the degree that he gets to smuggingly, if that's a word, laugh about people questioning him. Because what I would say is, I don't think Shane Beamer's catching you anytime soon, but Shane Beamer's beating you, which is kind of embarrassing, to be honest, at your house. And in 20, getting blown out by Ohio State, that was a bad loss. And then in 21, just multiple losses: Georgia, NC State, I think Pitt. And then in 22, they won the league, but they lost to Carolina, and I can't remember every single score along the way. You can't you can't be so firm with your convictions that you don't see the bus heading right at you. You can't say, well, uh, it's all good. I know what I'm doing. I'm crossing this road and not look both ways. And that's what's going on right now with, Clemson's going to have a hard time no matter what with NIL. I mean, that's just what it is. It's the other stuff that would bother me. It would be the transfer portal. You're still a name in college football. Guys are going to want to go there. Um, and to not take, I mean, you can't, there's only so many Sammy Browns out there that you can just go grab 5-star kids. I mean, they're getting eaten up by other programs. De'Aaron Kendrick, he's got a national championship at Georgia too, not just at Clemson, right? You look at all the guys who have transferred into Georgia and have won national championships. You can't say that at Clemson because at the time, with the way the portal has worked, they have not taken advantage of the transfer portal in any way, and they have such a big brand, but they're not taking advantage of it. So something's changed, and burying your head in the sand about it is not a good way to go about correcting that. And that's why I wonder, since that day of that night in Charlotte, four seasons ago, Georgia was I think a 3-point dog in that game. They're going to be probably a 2-touchdown favorite in this game. What's happened? What's the difference between the two programs now? Kirby's cheating? Is that what we're going with? How? Like, okay, prove it or turn them in or whatever's happening in the Big Ten, Well, that's going to be a hard case to prove, and apparently, you can quote cheat now because of NIL. So you'll have to figure something else out on that front about complaining. Uh, you know, the ACC is just as good as the SEC. That whole thing. I mean, like Clemson fans usually don't make that you know destructive narrative comment because that's not true. But what's happened is he's taken his eye off the ball. That's just all there is to it. He's not been recruiting the way that he needed to. Developing, they do a really good job of developing, in my opinion, at Clemson. They do a really good job of developing players. But you're only going to develop a 3-star player probably 2 or 3 out of 10 that are really going to be explosive playmakers for you. You need Trevor Lawrence. You need Deshaun Watson. You need all these guys. I mean, Mitch Hyatt didn't do anything after Clemson, but he was a 5-star player. Dexter Lawrence, all these guys. I mean, they had real deal players that went there. Tosh Boyd, okay, so who kicked this whole thing off. You need high level players, and they don't have that right now. All you have to do is watch on the film. Now they got their chance. They'll play the Dogs in August, and we'll just see what happens. But I don't see it. And I watch Clemson probably second or third most behind Georgia and probably Florida. I watched them plenty. The quarterback is suspect. He was supposed to be a 5-star player or a very high level player. It didn't work with him. Didn't work with DJ. It's starting to say like without it being an NFL starting quarterback, it's not working out so hot. Now with that said, you could say about Kirby, well, without Stetson Bennett, that's harsh. I mean, Georgia's played for a national championship with Stetson. They played for one with Jake Fromm. Getting to the playoff in current form, the most recent form was not the easiest thing on earth for teams from the SEC. You usually had to win the league, not all the time. Alabama in 17, Georgia in 21, but that was usually the case. You could kind of waltz in sometimes from the ACC, although it must be said there's only 2 programs that got in there from the ACC the entire time, and they didn't get out in there an equal amount of time. So um, this is not going to be a quick fix. And my concern for Dabo and Clemson, not that I mean he would just laugh in my face, and that's him being um, very laissez-faire about this. My concern is you got to want to win all the time, every single day. It's not going to just happen. You can't you know, hope your way. You can't. I'm trying not to say certain things. You can't hope your way. You can't luck your way. You have to go do it. And they did it in the past. They're not doing it now. And I think that it's a great notion, but there's a reason why they're not winning championships right now. And the difference between the 2 programs, as probably we'll see in Atlanta, that will just spike the football on it. But they have chosen this up there.